listener production.
Hi, it's Helen Smith here with you. Welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up on our deep dive, US President Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have unveiled what they're calling a 20-point peace plan for Gaza, a deal they say could end the war that was recently found to be a genocide being committed by Israel, according to a UN Commission of Inquiry. But Hamas wasn't consulted. The death toll in Gaza continues to climb, and critics say the plan looks more like an ultimatum rather than a negotiation. And this is what our PM, Anthony Albanese, had to say.
Australia affirms the plan's commitment to denying Hamas any role in the future governance of Gaza, calls on Hamas to agree to the plan, lay down its arms, and release all remaining hostages.
But first, let's check the afternoon headlines. It's Tuesday, the 30th of September. As widely expected, the Reserve Bank has held interest rates at 3.6%. So far this year, the board has cut interest rates 3 times, most recently in August. The board noted that uncertainty in the global economy remains a key factor in the decision, including the likes of US President Donald Trump. So homeowners will have to wait until the next RBA meeting in November for a possible rate cut. The Taliban government has imposed a nationwide shutdown of telecommunications just weeks after it began surveying fibre optic internet connections. Afghanistan is currently experiencing a total internet blackout, according to watchdogs, as international news agencies say they have lost contact with officers in the capital. The Taliban have yet to give an official reason for the shutdown, with officials saying it would last until further notice. Now, we did a deep dive covering Taliban tourism recently, looking into the state of the brutal regime, especially for women. That link will be in your show notes. YouTube has agreed to pay $24.5 million to settle a suit with US President Donald Trump after it suspended his account following the January 6 attacks on the US Capitol. In 2021, Trump alleged the platform wrongly suspended his channel after January 6, with YouTube saying it suspended the president's channel because it had violated the website's policies against inciting violence. But due to the settlement, the case is now dismissed. The platform is the latest to join a long list of other tech companies who have also made multi-million-dollar payouts to Trump over past decisions concerning his accounts, including Meta, who settled a similar lawsuit with Trump in January for $25 million. And Mary Fowler has made her catwalk debut at Paris Fashion Week. The Matildas and Manchester City football star walked for L'Oreal after signing with the cosmetics company last year. Fowler says she was a little nervous, but the opportunity to walk alongside extraordinary women in a celebration of women's empowerment, inclusion and sisterhood is truly inspiring. Now it's time for our deep dive. Trump and Netanyahu are hailing a 20-point peace plan as a historic breakthrough to end the war on Gaza.
One of the great days ever in civilization.
I support your plan to end the war in Gaza, which achieves our war aims.
Eternal peace in the Middle East.
Calling for a ceasefire, a hostage swap, a staged Israeli withdrawal, Hamas dismantlement, and a transitional government led by an international body, or else.
If Hamas rejects your plan, Mr. President, or if they supposedly accept it and then do everything to counter it, then Israel will finish the job by itself. This can be done the easy way, or it can be done the hard way, but it will be done.
But Hamas wasn't at the negotiation table, so what's really going on here? To help us all make sense of it all, we're joined by Professor of Global Islamic Politics, Greg Barton from Deakin University. Greg, how significant is this 20-point peace plan?
It's potentially tremendously significant if it goes through. And that's significant because we're almost at 2 years of this awful war, more than 66,000 lives lost, and countless more severely injured, traumatized. A large part of the 2 million plus population in Gaza on the brink of famine, and therefore, this could quickly cascade into a series of deaths that couldn't even be stopped with medical aid. So this comes just in the nick of time to save potentially thousands, potentially tens of thousands of lives. So it's a life and death issue. Of course, it's an imperfect deal. The text is pretty good in substance, but given the two leaders involved, Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, both have records of backing out of deals and of being duplicitous and being very self-serving. So there's lots of reason for skepticism, but it does come at the right time. There's reason to believe that regional nations, Arab states, will support it because they're desperate to get a breakthrough in this terrible conflict. So I think we can be moderately optimistic that finally we're going to see an end to this war just as it approaches the 2-year mark.
And what does this peace plan include? What does it outline that it will do exactly?
Well, the sad irony of this plan is it includes pretty much what every plan for the last 18 months has included, which is the end of hostility, the return of hostages, some exchange on the Israeli side for Palestinian prisoners, a return of aid into the Gaza Strip, a return of normalcy, and then a process of rebuilding. Critically, this was covered in Joe Biden's plan, about the end of his presidency. So in a sense, this has been tantalizingly within reach all this time. It's no great mystery as to the ingredients of a peace process, at least to begin with. Israel has been very reluctant to consider the day after the conflict, and that's been part of the problem. And that part of the problem is Netanyahu's coalition, which includes members like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, who would like to push all Palestinians out of Gaza, indeed out of the West Bank, given a chance. So that's been the stumbling block. But the details, as they're set out in this plan, as we can see them, if they're followed through, are sensible details, and it's what's desperately required at this time.
And do you see this as a genuine peace initiative or more of a political maneuver for Trump and Netanyahu?
Look, it's certainly a political mover for both Trump and Netanyahu. I mean, an optimistic reading of this is that it's face-saving for Netanyahu because it looks as if he's given lots of get-out-of-jail clauses, lots of caveats, and he may well exploit them. He's done it in the past. But the flip side is that we need some sort of breakthrough, and it has to be a breakthrough that's brokered by the President of the United States and supported by the Prime Minister of Israel. Now, both those individuals don't have great track records on following through on deals, but at this time, there's a lot of pressure from regional Arab states. There was a critical conference of Arab states after the Israeli attack on Doha, Qatar, on the Hamas residence. It was being used by the negotiators. And there was outrage, of course, because this is a close US ally, Qatar, and was asked to host Hamas for the purposes of negotiations over the last 2 decades. In any case, the upshot of that is there's a lot of pressure in the region to have a breakthrough. And Donald Trump, of course, has spoken repeatedly of his desire for a Nobel Peace Prize. So there's been a personal motivation for a breakthrough. He's not had a lot of success. Despite his address to the UN General Assembly of having solved 7 wars, the reality is his track record's pretty patchy as a peace broker. So there's personal skin in the game for him. This is something that he would like to have his name against. And, that would be good for the people of Gaza and the people of Israel if this peace can start and hold.
On the topic of Qatar, what did you make of Netanyahu apologising to Qatar over those military strikes during hostage negotiations? Is that a sign that Israel is trying to mend regional relationships or simply damage control?
It's certainly damage control, but also perhaps a sign that Netanyahu accepts the reality that he's got to find a way of moving forward. It felt like one of those parental intervention moments when, you're told, apologize to your sister, say you're sorry, and, you're forced to go through an apology. Donald Trump was on the phone to the Emir of Qatar, and, Netanyahu was asked to apologize. He did apologize. So you could be very cynical about all of the dynamics there, but at least it's a critical breakthrough. Without that, it will be hard to move forward. So that was one more roadblock that, at least for the time being, has been passed.
Getting back to the peace deal, Hamas was not directly consulted before the plan was announced. How does that affect its legitimacy or chances of success?
I think the chance of success now, the reason for being moderately optimistic is that Hamas doesn't have any other good options. We're at the end of the road. Of course, that rocket attack into the residence containing the senior Hamas leaders, designed to assassinate them, but apparently not unsuccessful, but therefore sort of literally blowing up the peace process. That's the reason why it's hard to communicate with Hamas at the moment. There will have been back-channel communications. There will have been work done. But publicly, at least, Hamas has not been consulted. I think in the end they will accept because they have no other better option. There is the tantalizing carrot held out to them that if they agree to leave the Gaza Strip, they will be given safe passage to another location. And that is good for them, obviously, but it's also good to get them out of the picture. There's no role for them to play. One of the key elements of this peace process is an alternative interim administration in Gaza and then eventually a Palestinian Authority administration, which Hamas plays no role. And it's very understandable given the horrible October 7th terror attacks of 2 years ago. I think Hamas is going to be forced to accept this because otherwise it will certainly face what's been a pretty destructive onslaught just recently in Gaza City. So I think it's, the writing is, pretty clearly on the demolished walls.
So, as you said, if they do reject the plan, what are those likely consequences for Gaza or for Israel, for regional stability?
I think if the Hamas leaders on the ground don't accept the plan, the military operations will continue, but they won't hopefully be the aerial bombardments, which are very indiscriminate, but rather targeted hunting down of leaders. I mean, Israel can do this. It's done it with Hezbollah in Lebanon. It's done it in Iran, so it could do it in Gaza Strip. But in any case, and that's what the Israeli Defense Force leadership is calling for, rather than aerial bombardments. So that's the hope, that if Hamas doesn't formally agree immediately, there'll be pressure on them as they're hunted down in Gaza City and beyond. And they'll be forced to accept the inevitable reality. But of course, it does leave a get out of jail card for Benjamin Netanyahu. Donald Trump said, "Look, we'll stand by you, Bibi. If Hamas doesn't follow through, then hope they do. But if they don't, then we'll back you doing what you have to do." Which, of course, could literally be a license for the continued destruction of Gaza City, where there's 1 million plus people sort of without any good options. So it's pretty dire. But I'm maybe just because of disposition heading towards optimism, but I think it's, as we come to the 2-year mark of this terrible war, there are no better options and there are good incentives on all sides to accept an outcome like this.
Now, Trump's plan would establish a temporary governing board for Gaza to be known as the Board of Peace. That would be headed by himself and include former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. What do you make of this, given Sir Tony's decision to involve the UK in the 2003 Iraq War?
Look, it'd be very easy to have a whole episode discussing the problems of the Iraq War and Tony Blair. It's easy to be very cynical about his involvement. But the flip side is politics is the art of the possible. This is realpolitik. Donald Trump is only going to be a symbolic presence on this group. Tony Blair does have considerable skills and considerable connections. If he can use them for good, he can go some way to redeeming his reputation with this. So, I think we have to be open to seeing some good come out of this. Certainly, he has the gravitas and the respect of some fairly conservative players in the region and around the world. And I think it would be accepted by the Trump administration. And that's really important. So the main thing is this conflict stops. So we begin the process of starting peace, rebuilding, getting that desperately needed medical and food aid in, and anything that can do that almost. I'm not saying any price, but I mean, we shouldn't be looking for the perfect. We've got to accept the good enough at this point. Yeah,
absolutely. Now, how has this plan been received here in Australia?
I think for the reasons I've just outlined, it's realpolitik. We accept this is not perfect. There's lots of holes with it. There's lots of ways it can fail, but there is no better option on the table. For the assault of Gaza City to continue, we literally risk tens of thousands of people tipping into famine and death or being caught up in the destruction. Despite the Israeli government's call for people to leave, they have no safe place to leave. And we've seen many cases of people losing their lives as they're fleeing. So the conflict is just the most worst scenario we can imagine. So anything that will bring an end to this is worth supporting. Of course, we don't know how it's going to play out week after week, but this is the necessary beginning and therefore it deserves support. And I think that's the reasonable position the Australian government's taking.
Greg, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks very much, Helen.
That was Professor Greg Barton there from Deakin University. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'd love you to subscribe, or you can follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. And we'll be back in your feed this evening with another beefing episode with The Briefing's very own Antoinette Lattouf versus the ABC. I'm Helen Smith. Catch you next time.